Hey guys, this is Yoda, and this video will be a Spellbop slash Bop cheat sheet for all the dungeons in Dragonflight Season 3. So we'll go through Galron Fall first. In this first pull, Spellbop isn't too useful. You can use it to block the boss's Chrono Shear, or you can use Bop for Time Rip, but I generally just don't play Bop in this dungeon, so I kind of just save the cooldown here in the global. In this area, Spellbop is very useful. You can use it to immune Chrono Burst from this guy. You can use it on the time stream anomaly for Bloom. It's much better if you use it on the healer dispels you, and then you spell up whoever the Bloom is on. Because if Spellward is on you and he casts Untwist, then Untwist can go on an ally instead of you, which is not good. On the boss, Spellward is very effective against Chrono Faded. Usually what you do is you wait for the healer to dispel, and then you sack the other person. Or, someone else if the other person's really tanky. And then the next one you won't have sack. So you use Spellbop, and then the next one you sack again. Then on the fourth one, you could use Lay on Hands or some off healing. And the fifth one you have sack again, and the sixth one, it rotates like that. You don't have to necessarily use Spellbop on the second one. You could just wait, but, try to use Spellbop when you don't have sack, basically. Okay, then we go to the Dragon Pulls. If you Spellward early on this, then you can squeeze one in here, just for the dragon AoEs, but it's not like super necessary, depending on how you pull it. So, consider that. Then when you get to this boss, you can either Spellward in P2 during the AoE, like Necrotic Winds, or you can do it in P3 on an ally, so you can pass Corrosion to an ally. That Corrosion dot hurts a lot when you pass it, so you can Spellward an ally, pass to them, and then take it back, and then pass them again, and then take it back to extend the duration as much as you can. On the last boss, Spellward isn't too useful. You can just use it for Earth Surge. This does nature damage, and it kind of makes your casters have to move. So if your caster wants to plant and break the shield with their haste buff, then that's a good use of Spellward there. Extinction Blast can also be blocked with Spellward if you're having trouble with that. Usually I just use sack on the person and it's fine. But you can Spellward that person too, and it'll also be fine. Alright, Murazon's Rise. This dungeon, I usually don't play Bop. You can only really use it on this boss, on the Archer Bleeds, but I don't think it's too useful there. I don't think it's worth the point, so I just play Spellbot. In the first phase, the first trash area, you can use it on the Maidens, Ancient Radiance, just to reduce healing required on an ally, or even yourself if needed. You can also use it so your caster can plant and not worry about orbs, but it's not super useful on the trash. On the boss, you can either use it to make a Spark of Tear a lot easier, or you can use it for the Soak plus Spark of Tear overlap. Either you Spellward someone else and they two-man Soak with you, or you can just Spellward the person with Spark of Tear and you Soak together. Either way works out. If you have Spellward, when you get to these two mobs, like the Marauder and the Watchkeeper, Spellward is pretty useful on an ally because there's a lot of pulsing AoE here from the Infinite Schism and the Infinite Fury. Not mandatory, but it's pretty useful there. For the rest of the dungeon, pretty much, you're just using Spellward on frontals, dragon frontals. Like this dragon frontals you, Bronze Exhalation. Nothing useful here. There's some bloom mobs, but they tend to die really quick. So if you're a dwarf, you just dwarf one and then they die. You can use it here for Time Beam, but it's not super useful. Because it's one Time Beam out of 9. These mobs is kind of the same, similar to an earlier pull. You could use it on this pull, either on the frontal or Infinite Fury. But I find it to be super useful I don't use it here because I like it a lot in phase 1 or the beginning of phase 2 of the last boss. Because this boss actually pressures tanks quite a bit. Spellward is really useful for blocking a Temporal Breath. Just be careful because if the ads are out, and you Spellward yourself, then this ad will cast Infinite Blast on your ally. So make sure you taunt him when you have Spellward out. Alright, next we go to Waker's Manor. I do play Bop in here. And my route goes left, so we get to Witches first. I don't use Bop on Witches. It's much better to use Spellward. If you're playing Spellward, you don't necessarily need it in this dungeon. But I do play it because of Sister Maladies, Unstable Runic Mark, and Aura of Dread. A lot of the time, this second witch can be really tough for your healer to heal. So either spell warding the healer so they can just plant and like spam whatever healing buttons they want to do, or use it on the like a caster like a warlock or something, or a mage. Probably not a mage, so they can just stand still and cast. That's also useful. Whereas compared to the Thorn, like the Jagged Nails, you can usually just sack or lay on hands or something to get around that. So I think it's much more useful on Malady. So if you play Spellward, this is where you want to use it on Malady. Spellward's not too great. This is like kind of the best use in the whole dungeon for it. But if you play it, that's where you use it. Alright, next, you can maybe squeeze a spell bop in here for maggot damage. But it's very important that bop is up for the Soulbound Goliath. This is like one of Prod Paladin's biggest strengths in this dungeon. Bop can be used to immune a Soul Thorns. So it's like one of the adds that stuns your ally. And normally you'd have to focus it down. You can just bop it and say, nope, we go next. One play I like to make for that is I bop right before I'm going to clear, so it's really consistent. Like, a lot of healers are like much more able to heal the fire clears if they know exactly when it's happening, and using bop so you don't have to deal with like variable DPS procs it makes it really consistent and easier for them. So a lot of the time, just like, you know, on the second clear, like after 2 Thorns, on the third one, I was like, okay, I'm bopping, and then we clear right after, and the healer's always ready for that. Spellward's not too useful on this guy. You can like bop a caster so they can stand still during Tenderize, but it's like not that important. Down here, you could use Spellward on this pull if you're having trouble surviving, like just on a caster or a DH, so you know they'll survive the bolts and hopefully they kill the pull really quick. It's also useful down here, same reason. There's literally 6 casters that are spamming bolts on your team. Just Spellward like your best DPS and they'll carry for you probably. You can also use it on Lord Waycrest's Wasting Strike. It's pretty good there. It's kind of a heavy hitting tank buster. Spellward can save you in a time of need there, but it's not super crazy. On Last Boss, if you pull, you don't really need it just for Last Boss alone, but if you pull it with Trash, there can be a dangerous overlap with the adds Dark Leap plus the boss's Dread Essence. So on the first Dread Essence, you would just Spellward summoning someone if it's up. Just for like random, just in case they would have died. Alright, Black Recold. I do play Bop in this dungeon. It's not super necessary, I think, especially as the keys get really high, but it is pretty good. We'll talk about that later. So, start at the beginning. So, you can send a spell word like first global on this pull, and it'll be up in time when you need it next. Like literally first global of the dungeon, basically. I don't use it on this boss. The only time you would actually use it is for Soul Burst, like at the end of the boss-ish, maybe at the halfway point, depending. But usually your group can get through just with your sack plus, you know, their personals or immunities. They don't really need immunities afterwards, so they just immune this. The reason you have to spell word first global and not use it on the boss is because it's extremely useful on these spiders. So Bubble and Bop have problems on these spiders because if you use those on yourself, oftentimes, especially with Bop, obviously your allies are just gonna like get meleeed, right? So that's not too useful. With Bubble, the problem is that you're like running really fast from the bottom of the stairs up, and if you outpace these spiders, then they might not get bubble taunted, and then they can hit your allies. So what I like to do is use Spellward. If you Spellward yourself, then these spider melees will melee you, but they will not apply the Soul Venom. So you can kind of just Spellward yourself and run all the way up the stairs. You get here at 0 stacks, which is like insane if you've ever tried to tank this place without Spellward. You either get here, or if you're like feeling like crazy, you can go up here all the way with Spellward and have 0 stacks. Then you just start the dispel cycle from here. They dispel, then you dwarf, then they dispel again. And hopefully the spiders are dead, but if they're not, you know, maybe your forbearance is over and you can bubble, hopefully. But yeah, I use Spellward here. Then the next use is if you have Bop, you can use it here. Grouping these mobs can be kind of troublesome because this patrol can be somewhere else. You might want to pull this too, and then you're like getting hit in the back while you're running through all the way down the hallway. Bop is super useful especially if you're doing the double pull for grouping this. You just bop yourself and go, tell your allies to like wait over here, and it's all good. You can, if you didn't use Bop there, you can use it for Sick Bats if you feel like it. After the nerf, it's not super necessary. On this boss, you can bop a Hateful Gaze, but be careful. If you're bopping Hateful Gaze, you want to bop someone that's not targeted, because otherwise he'll use his charge instantly, which will maybe hit someone on the way who's not ready for it. You want to bop someone else and have them block it. There is some cheese, which I haven't tested recently, which if you bop the very first Hateful Gaze that he does, sometimes he reverses his spell Q and then he does Stomp before the gaze, which means it's a lot easier to top between the gaze and the Stomp, but it's like not that big a deal recently. And this boss is much scarier in terms of one-shots rather than like the healing required. So I tend not to do that. It's better to use Bop as like a soaker. If you didn't use Bop there, like if it's fortified, you can Bop here, just having a DPS able to not worry about Raven Dive. It's pretty valuable, but I would probably advise just holding Bop for the last boss. Because if you die here, you just run back. If you die on last boss, it's GG. Alright, so last boss. In phase 1, you will get Shadow Bolted by this. He's not the vampire yet. He's like just kind of flying around out here, Shadow Bolting you, doing random damage that's unpredictable. I think in super high keys, you will end up using Spellward here. You just like sack someone, and when sack is over, they personal, and then when their personal is over, you Spellward them, or maybe like the reverse order or something like that. That way, you know someone won't get one shot at the beginning because it's actually a really dangerous thing. If you didn't use Spellward that way, then the best use is Bop in P2 to immune a Stinging Storm. Stinging Swarm. That's like similar to the Soulbound Goliath. He just throws a swarm on someone, it mini stuns them over and over, and it does a lot of damage. Bop is really useful for that. That's the best. Ideally, you use it there, but if you need Spellward in P1, you can also do that. Don't pop yourself to take this off, you can just bubble it. Alright, Tall. In a Tall, I do play both Bop and Spellward. First use is on Razan. Usually I go Razan first. Don't Bop yourself. You use Bop to immune the pursuit. So if it goes on someone and it's really bad if they have to run away, then you just Bop them and they get eaten and they just DPS while they're eaten. Spellward is also useful on... It's actually not that useful until like the last boss. You could use it in this area for the Colossus Soulburn, but usually healers can deal with that, especially if you sack. You can also use it on Volcall, just randomly for HPS. Not that great of a use. If you pull the middle pull, Bop is really useful here because it blocks the wild thrash damage. You would Bop a squishy during that. Routing in a Talazar is like kind of liquid right now. Like no one really knows what route they do. But I would Bop Razan, and I would Bop the middle pull if you do that. And you want to use Spellward on Yasma to block Soul Rend or Racking Pain. Either one. Whoever, like you would wait for your team to use their personals, then when they have no personals, it's either sack, or if you have no sack, then it's Spellward. Alright, so that's that dungeon. Now we go Everbloom. In the Everbloom, I don't take Bop, it's pretty much useless. Spellward, however, is very good. So the first use is on these Dread Petals, Dread Petal Pollen. So they apply a stacking slow / damage taken debuff to you. Freedom immunes that, so ideally you just go Freedom, Bubble, Freedom. But then, you know, on the next bowl, you're not going to have Bubble, right? So you Freedom, Spellward, Freedom. Spellward is a little bit worse than Bubble because it does not take the stacks off, it just stops them from being applied. So you Freedom, then you like, hopefully you're tracking your Freedom duration, and like at the end of the Freedom, you Spellward yourself and you won't get any stacks. Be careful if you use Spellward and these naturals are pulled. If you Spellward yourself, then the Dancing Thorns, they will target your allies. So just be careful of that, make sure you kick if you Spellward yourself. It's also pretty useful if you pull Boss with some flowers, then like they're giving, then you can just Spellward and block the stacks and his Parched Grass at the same time. The next use, if you happen to pull these Abominations, a lot of people still pull them. Spellward can use to block this, Noxious Eruption. On this Council boss, Spellward is pretty good. Usually I use it to block Noxious Charge on myself, like I'll just go through all my cooldowns and I have nothing, Spellward myself to block a charge, easy. You could use it on an ally, but I find especially Prot Paladin, with a Prot Paladin in the group, you're more at risk than your allies are. So it's better to Spellward yourself. On this area, you can Spellward for Cinderbolt Salvo. I would do it really early if you do, or not at all. Usually I just Spellward here and then it's on cooldown here. Then you can Spellward on this boss during a Cinderbolt Storm. You can use it on yourself if you're going to die to the bolts, but hopefully you won't and you just use it on an ally. On this boss, Spellward is again useful. You use it after he summons an ad, the Flourishing Ancient, and then when he's casting Colossal Blow and the Flourishing Ancient is alive, you Spellward an ally. Preferably one, that doesn't have a person running. Alright, that's the Everbloom. Next we go to Darkheart Thicket. Personally, I think Bop is kind of bad here, but it is playable, and Spellward is very good, so go from the beginning. In this first pull, this is where Bop is actually useful. These cats do Grievous Rip. Bop basically takes one out, or immunes an ally from it. But I think Spellward is also good because it blocks this Bear's Maddening Roar, and your allies won't take damage from Corruption Pool if they have Spell Bop. So personally, I prefer Spell Bop here and just don't play Bop at all. But, preference. Spellward's not too useful on this boss. You could do it on an ally and they can run through the puddles, but who cares? In this area, you can use it on the keepers if you accidentally pull one or pull one on purpose. You can use it to stop the mushrooms, like just spell up an ally, then they go clear mushrooms. But you should use it early because it's very, very important to have Spellward for this boss. This boss is like kind of a nightmare for tanks because of Crushing Grip. Especially Paladin. So, fortunately for Paladin, you have Bubble and Spellward that now both work on Crushing Grip. So, just, whenever you don't have cooldowns, just Spellward yourself on a Crushing Grip. You can plan for it. After this boss, usually it's on cooldown here, but you could use it to immune some Dread Bursts. On this boss, it's useful for one Earthshaking Roar. This can one-shot your DPS. But obviously, they'll have their own answers, ideally, because Spellward can only save them one time. So usually you'd use it, if someone messed up, they use their personal randomly, then you can Spellward them to cover it. But you also have sack, so usually you don't need Spellward here. Once you get to this trash, usually I don't Spellward on trash here, but if you see a bolt, about to go off on an ally, then you could Spellward them to save their life. But usually I don't use it here. And I save it for last boss. Last boss, you want to use Spellward in the last phase because below 50, he starts to get stacks when the swirlies land on him. And that gives him more spell power, basically. And then his stuff has a much higher chance of one-shotting. So you want to use sack, and then you Spellward the next guy, and then you sack again, hopefully, maybe later in P2. So yeah, that's how you use Spell Up in this dungeon. Last dungeon is Throne of the Tides. So Bop is somewhat useful in this dungeon, but you kind of want to use it when you were going to want to Spellward soon anyway, so it's optional, I think. So the main use of Bop is on these, not the dredges, it's the Snapdragons. Don't Bop yourself, but this Bleed, Razor Jaws, and the Fixate is really deadly, usually to your allies, so you can use Bop on an ally and they just sit there and tank it, and then hopefully it's your Demon Hunter and he just kills it for you. If you don't take Bop, then Spellward is useful on trash for this Crushing Depths early on. It's like the massive healing absorb that goes on an ally. You just Spellward them and they won't die. You can Spellward, you can sack one, then Spellward, then sack, then lay on hands. It's really cool. Okay, next it's useful on this boss. You can cover a Shock Blast into Focus Tempest Overlap with Spellward. Keep in mind that you do also have sack, so usually you'll sack, and then when sack is down, and your allies have no personals, then you use Spellward after that. Next, it's useful on this boss. You can use it to block a knockback in case one of your casters just wants to plant for a little bit. Not super necessary, but it's useful there. If you didn't use it there, you can use it at the beginning of the trash here on Clenching Tentacles into Shadow Smash. So it'll immune the Shadow Smash, so if a caster gets yoinked, you want to make sure they live, you can Spellward there. Again, not super necessary, but it can be useful. Usually I don't use that one. On this boss, you you can use it on Flame Shock. So this Flame Shock casts more often than your healer has Dispel. So usually they'll like Dispel one, then heal one, then Dispel one, then heal one. You can Spellward the one that they're going to heal. So basically they get to Dispel, and then you Spellward, then they Dispel the next one. So they get a little break. You can use it on yourself. The totem causes attacks to do some nature damage. For my small amount of testing, its Spellward on yourself is roughly like 20% damage reduction. So I think usually it's better to use it on your ally. Maybe you could, like if he's Storm Flurrying you and you were going to use Spellward, you would just use it on an ally with Flame Shock on them that your healer can't dispel, and then your healer can just focus you, right? That's, I think, the best use of Spellward. Next, you go over here. Usually Spellward is really useful on these Tainted Sentries who are casting Swell. You would do it like when you have high disease stacks from these corruptions dying. So like you would dispel one person, sack a second person, and then Spellward a third person, right? When you're all about to die, and then you're a paladin, so we all live instead. That's really good. Then on this boss, Spellward's not too useful. You usually just use it to block like some AoE damage, or if your ally needs to stand and poop, you can use it there too. All right, so that is the cheat sheet. There will be a document posted below the video with basically all this information in text form, so be sure to check that out if you want. If any of this you find disagreeable, or if you just want to hit me up, then Twitch chat is a great place to do it. Twitch.tv/YodaTV. That's all. Thanks everyone for watching.